Welcome to our deep dive, into the world of dark psychology, persuasion manipulation.
Mhm.
It's a fascinating area, and you've given me a lot to work with here. You've got excerpts from Dark Psychology, 9 in 1. Let's see. Persuasion and Dark Psychology, and then Manipulation and NLP Techniques.
Yeah, some really interesting titles,
The
right?
titles alone are pretty chilling, so we're
Yeah.
going to unearth the tactics that manipulators use and how to spot them. And then, most importantly, how to protect yourself.
Right.
So it's almost like we're giving our listeners like a secret martial art.
I like it. Yeah, like a mental martial art.
But for their minds, exactly.
Based on what you've shared here,
Mm,
I think we're going to be able to give them some serious mental defense skills by the end of this.
perfect. So let's jump right in. The first thing that jumped out at me from these books was this concept of the dark triad. It sounds kind of like, like a comic book villain origin story.
Yeah, doesn't it? It's got a certain dramatic flair to it.
Yeah.
The dark triad, as psychologists call it, is narcissism, Machiavellianism, and sadism. And what's really interesting is that each of these traits can be masked by seemingly normal behavior.
Oh, that's what's so unsettling about it, right?
All
So
right.
how can we learn to see through the facade and recognize the red flags for each of these dark traits?
Okay, let's start with narcissism.
Okay.
Imagine a coworker, we'll call him Tom. He thrives on constant praise and recognition.
Hmm.
And it's not just a healthy ego. Tom needs to be the center of attention, even if it means belittling others or taking credit for their work. And you might notice a pattern of Tom reacting very poorly to any criticism, even if it's constructive.
So it's beyond just being, a little self-centered. It's almost like there's a hunger there that can never be satisfied.
Right.
So now let's move on to Machiavellianism. How would you describe how those manipulators operate?
Machiavellianism, think about cold, calculated manipulation. They're the puppet masters who believe that any means justify their desired ends. Have you ever been in a situation where a colleague, maybe even Tom, sabotaged someone's reputation to get ahead?
Yeah.
That's a classic example of Machiavellianism in action.
Yeah. So they would ruin someone's career just to climb the ladder. I mean, that's pretty ruthless.
It is ruthless, and that's why these traits are grouped together.
Right.
So last but not least, sadism, what makes this trait so disturbing?
Yeah.
Sadism is about deriving pleasure from the suffering of others. And this can manifest in subtle and extreme ways. And the source material you provided actually highlighted a surprising influence. Statistics studies have shown that police forces, on average, have higher levels of sadism compared to the general population.
Wow, that's a disturbing thought. I mean, does that mean all officers are sadists?
Not at all. It's important to remember that this is a complex issue.
Right.
But this statistic simply highlights a pattern that requires further exploration. Why are individuals with a predisposition for this trait drawn to positions of power and control?
Yeah, that's a really good point. And I'm already starting to think more critically about these concepts now that we've kind of unmasked the dark triad, these narcissists, Machiavellians, and
Yeah.
sadists. Let's get into the specifics of their manipulative tactics. What tools do they use to control and manipulate others?
Well, their toolbox is overflowing, sadly. But there are many subtle and surprising ways that manipulation can manifest. And these books you shared reveal a wide range of them. Even positive reinforcement, something that we usually consider a good thing, can be weaponized by manipulators.
Wait, so how can positive reinforcement be a bad thing?
Think about it this way. You have a friend who's constantly showering you with gifts and compliments,
Right.
but then withdraws that affection whenever you disagree with them or don't meet their expectations. That's a classic example of how positive reinforcement can be used to control and manipulate.
That's a very unsettling example. It's like they're almost trying to train you like a pet, reward you for good behavior and then punish you for bad behavior.
Exactly. And what's so insidious about this tactic is that it's difficult to recognize it as manipulation because on the surface, it appears positive.
That's true. That's a very good point. So it makes you wonder, how many seemingly positive interactions are actually masked manipulation. What other tools should we be wary of?
Another sneaky one is lying by omission. It's a form of deception where the manipulator technically tells the truth, but deliberately withholds crucial information that could change your perception or decision-making.
So it's like telling half-truths.
Precisely, it's a way for them to control the narrative and manipulate you into seeing things from their perspective.
Have you ever had that feeling like someone's not giving you the whole story, like they're holding back information that would change your whole understanding of it?
Right.
That's probably lying by omission in action right there.
That's a great way to put it. They're essentially controlling the flow of information to steer you in a particular direction, even if it's not in your best interest.
Wow, it's incredible how subtle these tactics can be.
It is.
Okay, so we've got positive reinforcement, we've got lying by omission. What else?
Another powerful tool in the manipulator's arsenal is shaming. And it's a tactic that preys on our insecurities and our desire for approval. Manipulators might use public humiliation, expose your secrets, or even make cutting remarks to undermine your confidence and make you more compliant.
It's almost like they're trying to break you down so they can build you back up in their own image.
That's a powerful analogy, and the impact of shaming can be incredibly damaging. It can erode your self-worth, making you more susceptible to further manipulation. So it's essential to recognize this tactic and develop strategies to protect yourself.
So knowledge really is our best defense against these tactics.
Absolutely. The more you understand these tactics, the better equipped you'll be to identify them and protect yourself.
So we've kind of explored the dark triad, these personality types that are wired for manipulation. We've uncovered some of their most common tactics.
Right.
But these books dive even deeper, don't they? What else can we learn about how these manipulators operate?
Well, there's this concept called covert emotional manipulation. Now, imagine a friend who was once independent and strong-willed, but seems to have changed drastically after entering a new relationship.
Oh.
This might be an example of covert emotional manipulation in action.
Okay, how so?
Imagine this new partner starts by showering your friend with compliments and affection, making them feel incredibly special and loved. However, slowly but surely, they begin using subtle criticisms or withdrawing affection whenever your friend expresses an opinion that differs from theirs or makes an independent decision.
So it's almost like they're being trained to conform to the manipulator's expectations.
Exactly. It's about gradually shifting their boundaries, beliefs, and behaviors to align with the manipulator's desires, often without them even realizing it's happening.
Oh, that's terrifying. It's like a slow-burning poison.
It can be incredibly insidious, and that's why understanding these tactics is so vital.
Okay, so we've covered quite a bit already. We talked about the dark triad, their toolbox of manipulation tactics, and now the concept of covert emotional manipulation. It's a lot to process.
It is.
But by understanding the psychology behind these behaviors, you're already taking a huge step towards protecting yourself. Okay, so now my question is, who are these manipulators targeting?
Right.
Are there certain types of people they tend to prey on?
Absolutely. Manipulators are incredibly skilled at reading people and identifying weaknesses they can exploit.
Oh, I have a feeling this is where it gets really interesting.
It does. One of the most common targets of manipulators is empathetic people.
But isn't empathy a good thing?
It is, but in this context, empathy can become a liability. Empathetic people are deeply attuned to the emotions of others, and manipulators can exploit that by feigning vulnerability or playing the victim to elicit sympathy and gain control.
So their strength, their ability to feel deeply, becomes a weakness that the manipulator can kind of use against them.
Precisely, they might fabricate elaborate stories to evoke pity and guilt, manipulating the empathetic person into providing support resources or even forgiveness for their actions.
That's heartbreaking. What other types of people do manipulators target?
Another common target is people with a fear of abandonment. This is a common fear, particularly after difficult experiences like heartbreak or loss. It's a natural human desire to feel loved and secure in relationships.
Yeah, I think we can all relate to that feeling to some degree.
Absolutely. And manipulators are experts at exploiting this fear. They might threaten to leave, withhold affection, or constantly put their target through emotional tests to create a sense of insecurity and dependence.
It's almost like they're holding the relationship hostage to get what they want.
That's a perfect way to describe it. They create a dynamic where the victim feels like they have to walk on eggshells to avoid being abandoned, making them more likely to tolerate manipulation and abuse.
Wow, this is heavy stuff. It's incredible how much these books have revealed about, the tactics manipulators use and the people they target.
It is a lot to take in, but remember, knowledge is power.
Yeah.
Now that you're aware of these tactics, you're better equipped to spot them in your own life and protect yourself from their influence.
That's a good reminder.
Thanks.
So let's shift gears and talk about how we can defend ourselves from these master manipulators. What are some key takeaways from these sources that can help us fortify our minds against manipulation?
The sources highlight several powerful defense strategies, but 3 stand out as particularly effective: acceptance, assertiveness, and self-care. These might sound simple, but they form a powerful foundation for building mental resilience.
Okay, let's start with acceptance.
Okay.
Why is accepting reality so important in the context of manipulation?
Think about it this way. If you're in denial about a problem, you're more likely to fall prey to someone who offers a quick fix or a false promise. One of your sources used a powerful example of a terminally ill patient.
Right.
The patient who accepts their diagnosis is able to make the most of their remaining time, while the patient who stays in denial becomes vulnerable to exploitation by those offering false hope or miracle cures.
That's a stark but powerful example. So by accepting reality, however difficult it may be, we're better equipped to see through manipulation and make more informed decisions.
Exactly. When you're grounded in reality, you're less likely to be swayed by manipulation tactics that rely on distortion denial or wishful thinking.
Okay, that makes sense. So how does assertiveness help us defend against manipulation?
Assertiveness is all about setting healthy boundaries and communicating clearly and directly. Manipulators often prey on people who are passive or afraid to speak up.
So it's about standing up for yourself, saying no when necessary, and not being afraid to express your needs and expectations.
Precisely. The sources highlighted the importance of body language and assertiveness. Imagine someone trying to manipulate you, and you meet their gaze directly, maintaining an open and relaxed posture while firmly stating your boundaries.
So you're non-verbally communicating that you're not an easy target.
Exactly. And by practicing assertiveness, you're sending a clear message that you won't be manipulated or taken advantage of.
Okay, so we have acceptance and we have assertiveness. The last one was self-care.
Yes.
Self-care is one that often feels a bit cliche, but these books made a compelling argument for its importance. Why is self-care so crucial in protecting ourselves from manipulation?
Think about it this way. When you're feeling depleted, stressed, or lacking in self-worth, you're much more susceptible to manipulation tactics. It's like your mental defenses are weakened, making it easier for manipulators to gain a foothold.
So it's like putting on your own oxygen mask first.
Precisely by prioritizing your physical and mental health through things like exercise, healthy eating, and getting enough sleep, you're strengthening your internal resources and making yourself a less appealing target for manipulation.
That makes a lot of sense. It sounds like self-care isn't just about, pampering yourself. It's about building a foundation of strength and resilience that can withstand manipulation attempts.
Absolutely. You're becoming more aware of your own needs, values, and limits,
Yeah.
which makes it harder for manipulators to exploit your vulnerabilities.
So far, we've covered a lot of ground. We've explored the dark triad, their manipulative tactics, who they target, and even some strategies for defense.
Right.
Where do we go from here?
Well, there's still many more layers to uncover, and based on the sources you provided, there's a particularly disturbing aspect of manipulation we haven't even touched on yet. Brainwashing.
Brainwashing, you mean like something out of a spy movie?
It might sound like science fiction, but it's a very real phenomenon, and it's more prevalent than you might think.
Brainwashing, that sounds intense. I mean, I'm fascinated and terrified to kind of dive deeper into this.
It's definitely a topic that pushes the boundaries of our understanding of manipulation. The sources you shared really emphasized how brainwashing can be this gradual process, subtly replacing someone's core beliefs and values with those of the manipulator.
They talked about it like replacing someone's map of reality.
Exactly. It's like they're subtly redrawing your understanding of yourself and the world, erasing certain landmarks and adding new ones that fit their agenda. And it often happens so slowly and insidiously that the person being manipulated doesn't even realize it's happening until it's too late.
And the sources even connected this to cults, which is pretty unsettling.
Right. They pointed out that cults are often masters of this technique. They slowly introduce new beliefs and practices, often disguised as spiritual enlightenment or personal growth. And because these ideas are often presented within a tight-knit community, the new recruit feels a sense of belonging and validation that can make them even more susceptible to the manipulation.
It's like they're replacing their old support system with a new one that reinforces the cult's ideology.
Exactly. And by the time the person realizes they've been manipulated, they've often become so isolated from their previous life that it's incredibly difficult to break free. They've essentially become dependent on the cult for their sense of identity and purpose.
This is seriously scary stuff. It sounds like brainwashing preys on our very human need for connection and meaning.
It does. And while cults are a particularly extreme example, these same techniques can be used in more everyday settings like abusive relationships or even in certain work environments where there's a toxic power dynamic.
So how do we protect ourselves from this kind of manipulation? Is it even possible?
Absolutely it is, and your sources offer some valuable insights here. The key is to cultivate critical thinking skills. Don't just blindly accept information, especially when it comes from someone who claims to have all the answers.
So it's about questioning assumptions, seeking out different perspectives, and doing our own research before jumping on board with any ideology or belief system.
Exactly. And be wary of anyone who tries to isolate you from your existing support system or pressures you into making decisions before you're ready.
Those are really practical and helpful tips. I feel like I'm already starting to think more critically about the information I'm consuming.
That's great to hear. Remember, knowledge is power. And by arming yourself with information and a critical mindset, you're making yourself much less susceptible to these insidious forms of manipulation.
So we've tackled brainwashing these sources, also touched on another technique I've always been curious about: hypnosis. Is it really as powerful as they portray it in movies and TV shows? Can someone really control your mind with a swinging pocket watch?
Hypnosis is often sensationalized in popular culture, but it is a real phenomena. However, it's not about mind control. Think of it more as a state of focused attention and heightened suggestibility, where you're more receptive to ideas and suggestions.
One of the sources mentioned that therapists use hypnosis to help people overcome unwanted behaviors and cope with things like anxiety and pain.
That's right. It can be a powerful tool for therapeutic change. But even in this context, the person undergoing hypnosis is still in control. They can choose to reject suggestions or end the session at any time.
So it's not like the hypnotist can make you do something against your will.
Exactly. It's more about harnessing the power of suggestion to create positive change.
That makes sense. Okay, so we've covered brainwashing and hypnosis.
Right.
What else is in this manipulator's playbook?
Well, remember how we talked about how manipulators can use even positive reinforcement to control others? That actually plays into a much larger strategy that your sources highlighted, building a facade of trust and rapport.
So it's not just about the specific tactics they use, it's about the overall image they project.
Exactly. Manipulators are masters at creating a persona that draws you in. They might present themselves as charming, charismatic, helpful, or even vulnerable, all to gain your trust and lower your defenses.
I can see how that would make you more likely to let your guard down and become more susceptible to their manipulation.
Precisely. And they'll often go to great lengths to build this facade. They might do favors for you, shower you with compliments, or share personal stories to create a sense of intimacy and connection. It's all part of their strategy to get you to buy into their carefully constructed narrative.
That's such a sneaky tactic because it plays on our natural desire to connect with others and build relationships. We're social creatures, after all.
We are, and manipulators are keenly aware of this.
Hmm.
They know that if they can make you feel like you have a special bond with them, you're more likely to trust their judgment and follow their lead.
This is making me rethink all of my relationships. How can I tell the difference between genuine kindness and a manipulative facade?
That's a great question, and it's not always easy to discern. But one of your sources suggested paying attention to inconsistencies between their words and their actions.
So if they're saying one thing but doing another, that's a red flag.
Exactly. Look for patterns of behavior that contradict their self-proclaimed image. For example, do they constantly talk about how much they value honesty, but then you catch them in a lie? Do they claim to be a supportive friend, but then disappear when you need them the most?
That's actually really helpful advice. It's about looking beyond the surface and paying attention to the subtext.
Precisely. And it's also important to remember that trust should be earned, not given freely. Don't be afraid to take your time getting to know someone before you let them into your inner circle.
That's a good reminder. It's easy to get caught up in the charm offensive of a master manipulator. So we've talked about how manipulators build trust and rapport. What other strategies do they use to get what they want?
Well, they're also masters of playing on your emotions. They know that if they can trigger an emotional response, they can bypass your rational thinking and make you more likely to act impulsively.
So it's about making you react rather than think.
Exactly. They might use guilt trips, flattery threats, or even anger to manipulate you into doing what they want.
Can you give me an example of how this might play out in a real-life situation?
Let's say you have a coworker who constantly complains about their workload and asks you to help them out, even though you're already swamped. They might play the victim, saying things like, "I'm so overwhelmed and no one else is willing to help me."
Oh, that's a classic guilt trip.
It is, and it can be very effective because it triggers your empathy and makes you feel bad for them. You might end up helping them, even if it means sacrificing your own time and energy.
So how do we protect ourselves from this kind of emotional manipulation?
One strategy is to become aware of your own emotional triggers. What are the things that tend to push your buttons? Once you know what they are, you can be more mindful of how others might be trying to exploit them.
So it's about knowing your weaknesses so you can fortify your defenses.
Exactly. And if you find yourself in a situation where someone is trying to manipulate you emotionally, Take a step back and try to detach from the situation. Don't react immediately. Give yourself time to process your emotions and think things through rationally.
That's a good strategy. It's easy to get caught up in the heat of the moment and make decisions we later regret. Okay, so manipulators are experts at building trust and playing on our emotions. What other tactics should we be aware of?
One that's particularly insidious is gaslighting. This is a form of manipulation where the manipulator tries to make you doubt your own sanity or perception of reality.
This sounds terrifying. How does that even work?
It often starts subtly. They might deny something you know to be true, or they might twist your words and make you feel like you're misremembering events over time.
Yeah.
This constant undermining of your reality can lead to self-doubt, anxiety, and even depression.
It's like they're slowly chipping away at your sense of self.
Exactly. And what's so insidious about gaslighting is that it's often difficult to pinpoint what's happening. You might feel like you're going crazy because your experience of reality doesn't match theirs.
This is making me question everything I thought I knew about manipulation. What are some signs that someone might be gaslighting you?
One of your sources listed some common phrases gaslighters use. They might say things like, you're imagining things, you're too sensitive, or you're making a big deal out of nothing.
So if someone is constantly dismissing your feelings or experiences, that's a red flag.
Absolutely. It's important to trust your gut instinct if you feel like someone is trying to make you question your own reality. It's essential to seek support from trusted friends, family members, or even a therapist.
That's really important advice. It sounds like having a strong support system is crucial for combating these kinds of manipulation tactics.
It absolutely is. Surrounding yourself with people who validate your experiences and believe in you can be a powerful antidote to gaslighting and other forms of emotional manipulation.
Yeah, it is kind of unsettling to think about, these tactics happening on a larger scale. It makes you wonder, like, how much of what we see and hear in the world is, actually just a facade.
Well, and your sources delve into this very concept. They argue that these same tactics, persuasion, deception, even brainwashing,
Hmm.
are at play in areas like advertising, politics, even social media.
It's starting to feel like there's no escaping manipulation. It's everywhere.
It's true, these influences are everywhere, but that's why it's so important to be aware of them. Knowledge is power, right?
Right. Yeah, that's true. So how do these tactics manifest in these larger arenas? Like, how does that work?
Well, let's start with advertising. It's not just about selling products anymore. It's about selling a lifestyle, an identity, a sense of belonging.
So they're tapping into those emotional vulnerabilities that we talked about earlier, our need for acceptance, our fear of missing out, our desire to fit in.
Precisely. They use images, music, and storytelling to create this emotional connection with the consumer, often bypassing rational thinking and appealing directly to desires, insecurities, and aspirations.
Yeah, it's like they're creating this fantasy world that we, desperately want to be a part of, even if it's not realistic or attainable.
That's a great way to put it.
Yeah.
They're selling us an idealized version of ourselves and promising that their product is the key to achieving it. And often they use manipulation tactics to make that promise even more enticing.
I see that, yeah, like those limited time offers that create a sense of urgency, or testimonials from satisfied customers that make us feel like we're missing out if we don't buy it.
Exactly. They're playing on our fear of missing out or our desire to be part of the in crowd. And it can be incredibly effective, especially when we're not aware of it.
Yeah, it really makes you wonder if you can trust anything you see or hear anymore.
It's not about distrusting everything, but about developing healthy skepticism, asking questions, doing your research, and being aware of the subtle ways information can be manipulated.
Okay, so advertising is one area where manipulation can run rampant. How about politics? I can't help but think of all the, campaign slogans and promises that politicians throw around during elections.
It's true. Political campaigns often rely on emotional appeals and persuasive rhetoric to sway voters. And sometimes those appeals can cross the line into manipulation.
Yeah, in the sources that I gave you, they talk about, how politicians might tap into, our fears about security or economic stability to get us to vote for them.
Right? They might use fear-mongering tactics to create a sense of urgency or make their opponent seem like a threat to our safety and well-being.
It's almost like they're trying to hijack our emotions so we act out of fear rather than logic.
Exactly. And it can be very effective, especially in times of uncertainty or crisis.
And what about the promises that they make? They always sound so appealing, but they don't always deliver, right?
That's where critical thinking comes in. It's important to look beyond the promises and slogans and examine their track record, their policies, and their alignment with your values.
So it's about doing our homework and not just voting based on, who gives the best speeches or has the catchiest slogans.
Exactly. It's about being an informed and engaged citizen and recognizing that manipulation tactics can be used in politics just like they can be used in any other area of life.
Okay, so we've covered advertising, we've covered politics. There's one more arena that your sources highlight that I think is especially relevant today: social media.
Yeah, the wild west of the digital age, social media, has become a breeding ground for manipulation, both intentional and unintentional.
One of the things that really struck me was the idea that, algorithms can create these echo chambers where we're only exposed to information that confirms our existing beliefs.
Right. These algorithms are designed to keep you engaged on the platform. And one way they do that is by feeding you content that you're likely to agree with.
Which makes sense from a business perspective, but the downside is that it can create these filter bubbles where we're not exposed to diverse viewpoints or challenged to think critically.
Exactly. And that makes us more susceptible to propaganda and misinformation if we're only seeing information that confirms our biases. It's easy to become convinced that our perspective is the only valid one.
Yeah, that's a scary thought. It's like we're losing the ability to have, meaningful dialogue and to really engage with, those who might hold different views.
It is a real concern. And it's not just the algorithms. These platforms are designed to be addictive, to keep us scrolling and clicking for hours.
Yeah, one of my sources talks about, how the constant stream of, this carefully curated images and messages can create unrealistic expectations and really fuel our insecurities.
That's a great point. We're constantly bombarded with images of people living seemingly perfect lives, and that can make us feel inadequate or envious.
Right, and that makes us more vulnerable to manipulation tactics that, prey on our desire for validation and approval. We might buy products we don't need or conform to, unrealistic beauty standards just to try to feel better about ourselves.
Exactly. Social media can create this distorted view of reality that can be very difficult to escape.
So what can we do to protect ourselves from manipulation in the age of social media? Should we all just delete our accounts and go live in a cabin in the woods?
That's one option.
Yeah.
But for those of us who aren't ready to completely disconnect, there are things we can do to become more mindful consumers of social media.
Oh, like what? Give me some examples.
One strategy is to be more selective about who you follow and what content you engage with. Unfollow accounts that make you feel bad about yourself or that promote unrealistic beauty standards or lifestyles.
That's a good idea. I'm going to do a social media cleanse when we're done recording this.
That's a good idea. What else can we do? Another strategy is to be more aware of the time you spend on social media, set limits for yourself, and take breaks throughout the day to disconnect and engage with the real world.
So finding a healthy balance, not letting social media consume our lives.
Exactly. And remember, what you see on social media is often a carefully constructed facade. Don't compare your behind the scenes to someone else's highlight reel.
That's a good reminder. Yeah, it's easy to get caught up in that comparison game and forget that, everyone's life is a mix of, highs and lows.
It is, and it's important to cultivate a sense of gratitude for the good things in your own life, rather than focusing on what you lack or what others seem to have.
This has been an incredible deep dive. We've explored the dark side of human behavior from individual manipulation tactics to how these same principles play out on a societal scale.
It has been quite a journey, but remember we started this conversation by saying that knowledge is power, and that's still true. By understanding these tactics and the psychology, you're empowering yourself to make more informed choices and to protect yourself.
That's a really empowering message. So what's the most important thing you want our listener to take away from this deep dive?
The most important thing is to remember that you are not powerless. Manipulation can be very effective, but it only works if you let it. By developing self-awareness, critical thinking skills, and trusting your instincts, you can become more resilient and create a life that is more authentic and fulfilling.
That's a great place to end this deep dive. Thank you so much for sharing your insights and expertise.
It was my pleasure.
To our listeners, stay curious, stay vigilant, and stay empowered. Until next time, happy diving.